You walk past a stranger's dog on the sidewalk, and without thinking, your whole face changes. Your voice goes soft, your shoulders drop, and for a few seconds, nothing else in the world exists except that animal looking up at you with complete, unconditional trust. Or maybe it's a cat on a windowsill that you stop to acknowledge, or a bird perched on a branch that makes you slow your pace, or a stray with tired eyes that follows you half a block and leaves you thinking about it for the rest of the day. You don't plan these moments. You don't decide to care. It just happens, automatically, like a switch being flipped somewhere deep inside you that you didn't even know you had. And here's what's strange. While most people around you keep walking, keep scrolling, keep talking, you feel something. Something real and immediate and surprisingly intense for an animal you've never met and will probably never see again. If that sounds like you, then you already know what it feels like to carry this kind of love inside you. But what you might not know, what almost nobody talks about, is what that love actually says about who you are, how your brain is wired, and why, for some people, the connection they feel with animals runs deeper than almost anything they feel with other human beings. The ability to love animals deeply is often treated like a charming personality trait, something sweet and harmless, the kind of thing people mention fondly in dating profiles, or laugh about when they choose their pet over a night out. And in some ways, it really is a gift, because the research is clear. People who bond strongly with animals tend to be more empathetic, more emotionally attuned, more capable of sensing unspoken feelings in the room. Studies published in the journal Anthropos have found that high levels of animal attachment correlate consistently with greater emotional sensitivity, lower aggression, and a more sophisticated ability to read nonverbal cues. Skills that, in theory, should make you exceptional at connecting with other people too. But here is where it gets complicated, and here is the part that almost no one tells you. For many people who love animals deeply, that same emotional sensitivity doesn't always make human relationships easier. It sometimes makes them harder. You feel more, yes, but that means you also hurt more, notice more, and absorb more from every environment you enter, every conversation you're part of, every person you let close. The very thing that makes you extraordinary with animals can make you feel quietly exhausted in a world built for people who feel less. And the real question isn't whether you love animals. The real question is, why is the love so much easier there than it is anywhere else? To understand that, you have to go back further than you might expect, further than your last relationship, further than your childhood, further than your first memory of holding an animal and feeling something click into place. Because for some people, the pull toward animals is partly neurological. Research in behavioral genetics suggests that traits like empathy, emotional sensitivity, and affiliative bonding, the drive to form deep emotional connections, have a significant hereditary component, with some studies estimating heritability rates between 30 and 50%. In other words, some people are simply born with nervous systems that are more finely tuned to the emotional states of other living beings, and animals, with their unambiguous body language, their present moment honesty, their total absence of social performance, become a natural sanctuary for that sensitivity. Think of it like this. Imagine you were born with a radio that picks up frequencies most people's radios can't hear. The world for you is louder and richer and more overwhelming, and animals exist on a frequency that is clear, consistent, and safe. But nature is only part of the story. For many people, the depth of their connection to animals was also shaped by something that happened in the environment they grew up in. When emotional safety was unpredictable, when the adults around you were inconsistent or critical, or simply absent in the ways that mattered, animals often became the one relationship where you never had to brace for impact. They didn't withdraw when you needed them. They didn't change the rules without warning. They didn't make you feel like too much or not enough. Psychologists who study attachment theory describe this as a secure base, and for children who couldn't find it reliably in the people around them, animals provided something that no amount of intellect or resilience could fully replicate, a relationship where showing up as you truly were was always enough. This isn't a story about damage, it's a story about intelligence, the intelligence of a nervous system that learned very early where it was safe to land. And that early learning doesn't stay in childhood. It travels with you, quietly shaping the way you move through the world as an adult, showing up in patterns you might recognize but have never quite had words for.
You feel the animal's emotion before you process your own. There's a specific experience that people with deep animal bonds describe, often with a kind of sheepishness, as if they're not sure they should admit it. They walk into a room where an animal is present, and before they've registered how they themselves are feeling, they've already scanned the animal. Is the dog anxious? Is the cat hiding? Is the bird too quiet? This isn't sentimentality. Neuroscientists call it affective attunement, the automatic synchronization of your emotional state with another being's internal signals. And in people with high empathic sensitivity, it activates before conscious thought. The emotional consequence of this is something that sounds like a gift, but often doesn't feel like one. You carry the feelings of the beings around you as if they are your own, and you often can't tell where their experience ends and yours begins. Which leads naturally to something else, because if you absorb emotion that easily, you learn, over time, to be very careful about what you let near you. Sign 2. You find human social environments quietly draining in a way you struggle to explain. Not all of them, and not always, but often enough that you've noticed. A party that looked like fun beforehand leaves you hollow afterward. A meeting at work that was objectively fine still costs you something. A conversation where nothing went wrong somehow still required recovery time. And you've probably spent years wondering if something is wrong with you because the people around you don't seem to need the same amount of quiet afterward. What's happening isn't weakness or introversion in the simple sense, it's that highly empathic nervous systems process social information on multiple layers simultaneously. What people say, what they mean, what they're feeling, what they're hiding, and what they need. Every social interaction is, for you, a full-body cognitive event, and the emotional residue it leaves behind is real and physiological, not imagined. Animals, by contrast, give you social connection without that tax. Their emotional states are legible, their intentions are honest, their presence is restorative in a way that human interaction often isn't, and the relief you feel in their company isn't an escape from life, it's your nervous system exhaling. But this pattern has a shadow side that's worth understanding, because the preference for animal connection over human connection doesn't always serve you. Sign 3. You hold animals to a different emotional standard than people. When a dog reacts with fear, you feel compassion instantly, without hesitation, without judgment. When a cat scratches you, you look for what you might have done wrong. When an animal is in pain, something in you responds with a clarity of care that bypasses every defense you normally carry. But when a person reacts with fear, or with anger, or with need, the same automatic compassion doesn't always arrive as quickly. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all. You've probably noticed this in yourself, maybe, and felt vaguely guilty about it. Why is it easier to forgive the animal than to forgive the person? The reason is both psychological and deeply human. Animals trigger your care without triggering your threat response because they carry none of the social complexity that human relationships contain. No history, no power dynamics, no possibility of calculated manipulation. Your empathy with animals is pure because it's safe. Your empathy with people is complicated by the fact that people have hurt you in ways animals simply cannot. And this distinction, safe versus unsafe empathy, starts to shape not just how you relate to others, but how you think about yourself. Sign 4. You are harder on yourself than you would ever be on an animal you loved. If a dog you adored made a mistake, cowered in shame, refused to eat, spent the day hiding, you would be gentle with it, instinctively, without needing to reason your way there. You would know that it needed kindness, not criticism. But when you make a mistake, when you fall short, when you fail at something you care about, the voice that speaks to you is often nothing like the voice you would offer that animal. It is sharp and exacting and relentless in ways that you would find genuinely cruel if you directed them at a creature you loved.
Psychologists who work with highly empathetic people note this pattern frequently. The same attunement that allows you to offer profound care to others creates a kind of blind spot when it comes to the self, because the self feels like the one thing that doesn't deserve the same unconditional grace you extend so freely to everyone else. This is not a small thing. This is the architecture of how you live. Sign 5. You grieve the loss of an animal with an intensity that surprises even you. You've probably experienced this or know someone who has. The death of a pet that hit harder than some human losses, that left a specific kind of silence in the house, a particular rearrangement of daily life that nobody around you quite understood. People who haven't felt this kind of bond often respond to animal grief with a discomfort that reads as dismissal. It was just a dog, or you can get another one. And if you've heard those words, you know how completely they miss the point. What you lost wasn't just a companion. You lost one of the relationships in your life where you were seen without conditions, where your presence alone was enough, where the connection asked nothing of you except to show up. That kind of loss is not proportionally small. It is precisely proportional to how rare that quality of relationship actually is. And this brings you to something that most conversations about animal love never reach: the mechanism underneath all of these patterns, the loop that quietly runs the whole system. Sign 6. You find it significantly easier to express affection, vulnerability, and emotional honesty with animals than with people. Not because you're incapable of those things with humans, but because with animals there is no risk of misinterpretation, no possibility of the softness being used against you, no social calculation that has to happen first. You can be completely embarrassingly tender with a sleeping dog. You can talk to a cat about things you haven't said out loud to anyone. You can sit with an animal in silence and feel profoundly understood, without needing to perform wellness or strength or certainty. For someone whose early experiences taught them that emotional openness with people carried risk, because it did, the ability to practice vulnerability with an animal isn't trivial. It's the only place some people ever learned that it was okay to feel things fully, and that is not a small thing to carry quietly inside yourself. Sign 7. You notice suffering in animals and in people before others in the room do. You've been in situations where an animal at the edge of the group was clearly uncomfortable, and you were the first to notice, maybe the only one to say something. You've also been in situations where someone in the room was struggling behind a composed face, and you felt it before it was visible. This is the same sensitivity operating in two registers, and while it makes you genuinely useful in a crisis, it also means you live with a level of emotional information that most people around you are simply not processing. You are, in a very literal neurological sense, carrying more data than the people beside you, and doing it continuously without a switch to turn it off. Now, consider what happens when these patterns compound over years. Because the signs you've just recognized aren't static traits, they interact, they reinforce each other, and over time they can create a loop that becomes harder and harder to see from inside it. Here is how the loop works. Your sensitivity makes human relationships genuinely more taxing than they are for most people, So you turn toward animal companionship, which is restorative and safe, which is exactly right, because that connection is real and valuable. But over time, if animal relationships become the primary place where you practice emotional openness, the gap between how you are with animals and how you are with people can quietly widen. You get better at reading animals. You get more comfortable in their presence. You get more skilled at that particular kind of intimacy, honest, nonverbal, without social performance. And human relationships, by comparison, start to feel like a translation effort that can begin to feel like it isn't worth it. The defense mechanism that emerges isn't avoidance exactly, it's something subtler. It's a gradual recalibration of where you expect to be truly understood. And when that expectation shifts far enough away from human connection, it starts to affect how much you invest in it. Why open up to someone who might misunderstand you when you can go home to a relationship that never does? The logic is emotionally impeccable and psychologically limiting in equal measure, because the very act of withdrawing from the complexity of human relationships means you stop accumulating the experiences that make those relationships easier to navigate. Psychologists call this an avoidance feedback loop. The behavior that protects you from pain also prevents you from developing the tolerance and skill that would eventually reduce the pain. And it runs quietly underneath the surface of a life that might look entirely full of warmth and care and meaningful connection, just distributed in a way that has become subtly imbalanced. There is also a specific long-term consequence that rarely gets named. People who channel the majority of their deepest emotional energy into animal bonds sometimes arrive at a point in their lives where they feel profoundly lonely in a way they can't quite account for, because on paper they are surrounded by love. They have animals, they care for them devotedly.
They receive real comfort from those relationships, and yet something is missing. Something human-shaped, and the feeling is confusing because you've told yourself, reasonably, based on experience, that human relationships are harder, riskier, more costly. What you haven't fully reckoned with is that they also offer something animals cannot: the experience of being known, complicated and imperfect, and sometimes difficult, by another complicated, imperfect, sometimes difficult person who chooses to stay anyway. None of this means you need to love animals less. That's not the direction this goes. Principle 1. Change the way you see what's happening. The sensitivity that makes animals feel safer to love is not a flaw in your design. It is a finely calibrated nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. And the fact that it developed partly in response to environments where human connection was unpredictable doesn't make it pathological. It makes it adaptive. What can shift is the story you've absorbed about what that sensitivity means, that you're too much or not built for human closeness, or that the ease you feel with animals is evidence that something is wrong with how you relate to people. The more accurate story is that you developed your greatest capacity for connection in the place where it was safest to practice it, and that place was not wasted time. It was the beginning of a longer education. Principle 2. Adjust the way you respond to the cost of human connection. For people with high empathic sensitivity, the exhaustion after social interaction is real. It is physiological, not performative, and pretending it isn't real by pushing through it consistently creates a backlog of depletion that eventually becomes unsustainable. What you can do instead is build recovery time into your relational life with the same intentionality you'd bring to any other resource you know you have a finite supply of. This doesn't mean withdrawing from people. It means being strategic about where your emotional energy goes, investing more deeply in fewer relationships, being honest about what you need after intense social experiences, and recognizing that the recharge you get from animal companionship isn't a replacement for human connection. It's what makes human connection livable for someone wired the way you are. Principle 3. Create a new internal standard. You already know how to extend unconditional compassion. The work, and it is work, not a personality transplant, is learning to apply even a fraction of that same standard to yourself and, over time, to the people in your life who are also doing their imperfect best. Not because you owe them the same ease you give animals, but because the version of you that can hold other humans with something close to the grace you offer a frightened dog is also the version of you that stops being quietly, inexplicably lonely in a life full of love. You started this video as someone who stops on the sidewalk for a stranger's dog, someone who slows down for the bird on the branch, someone who carries an animal's fear in your own chest without quite knowing you're doing it. And what this video has tried to do is not change any of that, but to show you that what lives inside that impulse is not sentimentality, and it is not a retreat from the world. It is one of the most sophisticated emotional systems a human being can carry. The animal that looks up at you on the sidewalk isn't getting something accidental. It's receiving the attention of a person who has spent a lifetime learning how to be present with another living thing in a way that costs them nothing because it is entirely genuine. That is a rare thing. The world needs more of it, extended, eventually, in every direction you're able to reach. You don't have to stop loving animals the way you do. You just have to start believing that what you offer them is also something you deserve to receive from the right people in the right time when you're ready to let them try. If something in this video landed for you, not just intellectually, but somewhere deeper in the way that true things tend to land, I'd really love to know what it was. Leave it in the comments, not a summary, but the specific moment where you thought, yes, that's it. That's exactly what I never had words for. Because that moment is different for everyone, and reading what it was for you is one of the reasons this channel exists. And if you know someone whose love for animals has always seemed like more than just a preference, someone who has probably never heard their sensitivity described as a strength, consider sending this to them. Not to diagnose anything, just to say, I saw something that made me think of you, and I think you should see it too.